From the University of California's California-China Climate Institute, this is Climate Dialogues with Jerry Brown. In Episode 6, Institute Chair Jerry Brown speaks with Christiana Figueres, one of the chief architects of the Paris Agreement in her former role as the Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Figueres is an internationally recognized leader on international climate policy and author of the book, The Future We Choose. The pair discuss the role of the U.S. and China in combating the climate issue, COVID-19 recovery efforts, and the need for international climate finance. Listen to their conversation now.
It's quite good to be with you again after years in the battles to do something about climate change. So this is an opportunity to highlight and let people know what's going on, what the challenges are, and how we're going to overcome them. And you're right at the forefront. In your role at the United Nations, at the Paris Agreement, you made it all happen. In fact, I might like to ask you, do you see that collaboration that brought about the Paris Climate Agreement something that is available now, that the US and China and others could come together in Glasgow to create something similar?
Well, first of all, Jerry, thank you very much for inviting me to your newish podcast. And also, it's really good to see you. We worked so closely when we were on our way and paving the road toward Paris. And so it really is so good to see you again. So do we have the level of collaboration? I would say, Jerry, that we're definitely having much more collaboration now than we did last year for the evident reason that we have a change in administration in the United States and how important it is to have a president and a cabinet that understands science and that are willing to design policy that is science-based and that is actually focused on the advantages, on pointing toward the advantages that climate policy can have for the US economy. So we've gone from totally irresponsible denial to very responsible engagement in the United States. And that, of course, opens many doors. I have to say that the United States has not only caught up with the rest of the governments that have been taking the lead during the 4 years of detour of the United States, but actually the United States has not only caught up, but I would say taken an even more important leadership position, because the United States is the first country ever to have an all of government approach to climate change. No other country has done that before. And that is the initiative of President Biden himself, who has asked every single cabinet secretary and every single head of US government agency to, of course, dedicate themselves to the challenges of their portfolio, but to do so through climate change lens. That is a first, and it cannot be the last, because it's a very important example that the United States is putting forward, and one that will have to be followed by many other countries. So that too, domestic. To the and sorry, because your question was about collaboration. What that actually means is that there is a completely unprecedented collaboration among the different departments and agencies of the US government to push forward very ambitious climate policies and measures that we had never seen before. In fact, I would say even in the Obama age, and you remember the difficulties that California has always had with other states because of the lack of that collaboration. So my first answer to your question is domestically, much more collaboration than we've ever seen. That is, to a certain extent, also spilling over internationally, where because of a much more open position of the United States, we see other countries, certainly the European Union, certainly the UK that is hosting the COP this year, as well as other industrialized nations, beginning to work with each other. And I point to the recent G7 decisions, for example, to stop financing coal overseas, including Japan joining that, which was the first time that Japan has ever made that kind of a commitment. So yes, more collaboration than we had certainly last year, but not enough, Jerry, not enough, because this really needs to be addressing climate change in a timely fashion, which is the important part. If we address climate change late, it doesn't matter because we'll still be in a total dystopian world. So we have to not only address climate change, but do it in a timely fashion. And addressing climate change in a timely fashion is quite a challenge. It is, I think, a challenge that is exponentially growing and hence needs exponentially growing levels of collaboration.
But do we see that? Isn't China right now building huge numbers of coal plants? And of course, America, putting the two on a comparative state of affairs here, America's burning oil like mad. California burns 18 billion gallons of diesel and gasoline as it propels its 30 million odd vehicles around the state. So both California, the US, China, and the world have got to step against certain economic patterns that are generating, I think the number is 40 billion tons of CO2 every year. So to drive that downward is going to be something. And as you say, the longer we wait, the more CO2 up in the atmosphere and the more global warming we can all suffer.
Yes, very true. And those numbers have actually been put forward by science with the very clear warning that we need to cut by 1/2 the current emissions that we have now in order to, by 1/2 by 2030, which is basically 8.5 years from now. And we have to be at 1/2 current emissions in order to be able to keep 1.5 degrees warming in sight. Otherwise, we totally lose sight of the ceiling of 1.5. And we now know what we didn't know way back in the Paris Agreement year of 2015, that there's an extraordinary difference, a radical difference between a world that goes to 2 degrees and a world that goes to 1.5 degrees. That 1/2 degree sounds ludicrous, but it actually is a world of difference. It is the difference between a world to which we can still adapt slowly but surely versus a world where we can no longer adapt, and that leads to constant destruction. So the odds are still to be decided. The consequences are huge for us not being able to reduce our emissions by 1/2. So China, it's interesting because I think China has both very good and very concerning news. As you well know, China has pledged to achieve a carbon peak before 2030 and carbon neutrality before 2060. And they've just released their 14th year plan, which includes some commitment to climate change, not as much as we would have liked to have seen. But those commitments that are on the table are now being moved down the ladder into the implementation stage on the part of provinces and on the part of the vast network of the bureaucratic system in China. The fact is that just in December of last year, the Central Economic Work Conference included the 2030 and 60 targets as one of the 8 key tasks of the Communist Party in 2021. And you go through and you see that in Politburo sessions, in central committees for financial and economic affairs, in many of the different bureaucratic parts of the bureaucratic system or the governmental system in China, there is now a commitment to what President Xi Jinping has announced. Now, and as well as provincial roadmaps. So you see more and more provinces developing those roadmaps now. Many of them are nearing completion, and they are expected to submit those roadmaps to the central government over this summer for final approval by the end of this year. So definitely some progress toward what we need to see in China. But we still see that despite that there is an announcement that there will be a peaking of coal soon, that does not reflect what is currently the reality, which that is that we still see that emissions are at an unprecedented high level in 2021.
China is building more coal plants. They're financing them all over the world. So I don't like to just put the burden on China, because at the same time, the United States under Biden has a great story, great intention. But remember, it's a divided Senate and a divided America. So how far will Biden go? We'll have a congressional election. Will the Democrats win and climate change continue on the agenda? Or will the Republicans take over the House or the Senate or both and block it? So I think we have both in the US for one reason and in China for another, not enough, because already we're at 1 degree centigrade above the beginning of the industrial age. And I am being told by credible scientists that in the next 7 to 10 years, we're going to be at 1.5. That's a 50% growth in a decade, something that's taken over 150 years to get to, the first 1%. So, this says the alarm bells need to be going off. And for some reason, among Republicans, and I think even there in China, they're talking about it, they're making some comments, but relative to the challenge, I don't see enough, not in California, not in America, not in China. So
no, I would agree. I would agree with you. No, I totally agree that we're not seeing as much as science demands from us, for sure. Within that envelope, Jerry, I do see that we're doing better today in 2021 than we were just last year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. So we are definitely in a process of transition. You and I are notoriously impatient people when it comes to the right thing to do. And so, of course, we're impatient because we understand that we need to accelerate this. But on the other hand, I think we have to stop for a moment and pause and recognize that there is improvement. There is improvement certainly in China, and they are currently the only government left that is still financing coal abroad, after Korea and Japan have now committed to not do so anymore. And China is feeling that heat, especially as financing of coal through the Belt and Road Initiative that is coming under more and more scrutiny, both internationally, but perhaps even more importantly, domestically, more and more scrutiny over investments of the Belt and Road Initiative that were previously much, much more populated with unabated coal, and that is beginning to be cleaned up. So I really think that we're in a transition phase. We shouldn't be here still. We should be much further advanced, but we are moving in the right direction. What we definitely need is scale and speed, which is not there yet.
So if you're imagining, I'll concede that we've made some progress, but since the goal keeps getting further away, my question is, what you say we need to do better? What would some of that better look like for Glasgow? What is the US or China or India, any one of them? Can you think of anything, any concrete step or initiative that one of these great countries could take to push the others in a direction where we ought to be come Glasgow, the end of this year?
Well, the United States has already come forward with a doubling of effort with respect to what Obama had committed. So I don't expect that they're going to increase that ambition. That is the result of a lot of internal analysis and is as ambitious as was expected by even the most strident of environmental organizations. So I think that's already on the table. And President Biden put that on the table early. He put it on in April because he wanted to use that as a leverage point to get other countries to do similar. Where the United States and others can still work and must still work between now and Glasgow is on the financing packages. You well know, Jerry, there was a promise many years ago that the global north would capitalize and would invest $100 billion every year into the global south for climate change activities. And we haven't done that. And that was supposed to be done by 2020. We're now into 2021. And at last count, the level of financing that has gone from the north to the south for climate purposes has been hovering around the 70 billion. So 70 billion. So one of the very, very important deliverables in COP26 has to be to close that gap between the 70 and the 100 billion. Now, as I say, even the 100 billion is basically the tail that wags the dog, because even 100 billion per year is peanuts compared to the cost of the technological transformation that is already underway and that we have to further see. It's not about $100 billion, it's probably closer to $1 trillion that have to be invested in the world economy. Curiously enough, that we're actually getting to. We are much more closer to that trillion, especially if you consider the $12 trillion of fresh money that has been invested by the different governments after COVID, or as we get out of COVID, as fresh capital goes into the economies. And when that fresh capital is not aligned only to recreate jobs that existed in the last century, but actually to finance and seed new industries, new jobs that are clean and much more long lasting, then we're doing two things. We're recovering the economy, we're recovering jobs, 10 million jobs in the United States, just to put a number on the table. And we are seeding the ground for a climate responsible economy. So it is entirely possible, and it is necessary to invest trillions of dollars into this transition. And it is currently already underway. What is not underway is the political symbolic promise of the global north to invest directly into the global south, the 100 billion. So, and I know that there are many brilliant minds working on this for Glasgow, but summary in Glasgow, we have to see many things, but the two most important, Jerry, are going to be, number one, is the sum total of the new upgrades of emission reductions that all countries have and will bring to COP26, is the sum total of that enough to get us on to a path toward 1.5 degrees as opposed to 2 or more? And number two, can they close the finance gap between where we are at 70 billion and where we have to be at 100 billion? Those two are the two most important deliverables of COP. One for transformation of the economy and in order to be accurate with science, and the other for political symbolism.
Okay, who has to deliver this? Is this more Biden, or is this more President Xi, or is it the European Union?
It's everyone.
Yeah, but before
it's everyone. Every country has now the opportunity and the responsibility to put their new upgraded emission reduction commitments on the table. Most countries, we have 70% of the global GDP is already under net zero emission commitments by 2050. That's excellent, but that's too far away. We need to know where they're going to be in 2025, where are they going to be in 2030. So 2030 needs to be the deadline for ensuring that the decarbonization of every single economy on this planet, all countries, has to be measured against where they're going to be at 2030. That, of course, means that industrialized countries have to reduce more than 50% in order to leave some room for developing countries that will reduce less than 50%.
So
but overall, average 50%.
Who's going to be the spearhead for this? Things are, we have so many other problems. Let's just hold that question for a second. Look, we just had COVID, and we had a lot of nationalism. Some people don't want to take the Chinese vaccine. Some of the Europeans didn't want people to take the Russian vaccine. We have a lot of people in Africa who haven't even gotten it. So that, I know you're very optimistic. So tell me, the scientists did a great job in getting the vaccine, but the politicians did not seem to rise to the occasion and recognize the common interest that the world leaders had, that the world had. And the same problems with climate. People keep talking about what's in the national interest of China or Russia or the US, but the question is, what is in the common interest of the people on planet Earth? And that language I don't hear coming out of the big politicians, maybe some of the smaller ones. But until that does, I don't see how we get off where we are, which is we're headed to 1.5 very quickly, and then we'll be on our way to 2. So unless we get some more radical interruption here, or some charismatic statesperson, president of the UN or yourself or somebody, we got to move these big people who are moving at a snail's pace relative to the growth of the 40 billion tons of CO2 that are going up in the atmosphere as we talk.
Well, yes, but I guess I am a little bit more realistic than you are, apparently, Jerry, which is quite unusual for us, because I frankly do not think that there is much movement on climate change if the motivation is global safety and global stability. I simply do not see that level of love for the planet, that level of altruism in any economy. So that is why it is absolutely critical to understand that there is a total coincidence between enlightened national interests and the global interest. If that were not true, Jerry, if that were not true way back in 2015, we would not have had a Paris Agreement. It was true then, and it is even more true now, that it is actually in everyone's enlightened self-interest to understand that if you want life continuity, if you want economic continuity, if you want business continuity, we have to have a planet that is alive. There are no jobs on a dead planet. There are no business opportunities. There are no investment opportunities. There are no economies that thrive on a dead planet. So we have to understand that moving toward a planet that is actually regenerated and regenerative is in our own interest as well. We cannot choose between those two. They have to be pursued together and in consonance with each other.
No, I get it. Look, it's obviously in our self-interest not to have climate horror or a nuclear blunder or another virus that or cyber attacks all over the place. So it's all in our national interest. I'm just making the point that if Putin and Biden and Xi can't get the idea that they're sharing the same planet and they share the same vulnerability to the virus, to climate change, and to some nuclear miscalculation, then we're all in trouble, because it's pretty silly to say, oh, we in America, we're going to take care of our climate change needs, but you in Russia, we don't care what you do. We're all in it together, even though I grant you, and I'm not trying to be overly optimistic about this or delusional, but the national interest vocabulary is the vocabulary of the politician. I got that.
Yes, absolutely.
Be us. But it's a complete distortion of what it means to be on planet Earth with 8 billion other people. There is a commonality in vulnerability, and there's a commonality in how we deal with this vulnerability. That means a common interest. Well, I don't want to quibble about that other than to say that I don't think pure old-fashioned 20th century nationalism is going to get us there. I think it's crucial, otherwise people don't move. Certainly in America, I can tell you, Biden won't get his climate programs if he doesn't have a strong national loyalty. And
totally agree.
But
totally
there
agree.
we are. So I do think that one of these leaders has to go in front of the other. Either Biden or Xi, Modi, somebody has got to push the others. And I do think that, if I'm not mistaken, that Xi and Obama, their collaboration together really was instrumental. So I think we need another parallel collaboration between some big leaders to push the rest of these national leaders. But before we get to Glasgow, I do think Biden's going to have to go beyond. And if he doesn't, then we'll be in a deeper hole. We'll still have to deal with climate change. It'll just be a lot more. And the 100 billion that we're supposed to do, we'll have to double that. And the trillion we need every year overall, we'll need more than that. So we're on the precipice, but we'll find a way because we have no other choice. Anyway.
No, I agree with you. And I should just, add that it is quite extraordinary that in a moment in history in which the US and China are at odds about almost every topic on the planet, they are not at odds about climate change. And that was so way back in 2015. It was not so during the Trump era because China was still following their climate policies, whereas the United States was not. But it is true now. And so climate collaboration on climate is a very important exception to a very, very rocky relationship between the US and China. And I actually think that they can use the collaboration that they've already started on climate change to hopefully smoothen out the feathers on other issues. But most urgently, they need to further collaborate on climate. And there's so many opportunities, right? Because so many technologies are still nascent and still require government investment in order to get to market. And there is no better place than through a collaboration between China and the United States. So I know that is still on the table for President Biden.
No, it is very much so. And John Kerry, the envoy, is working with Minister Xia. So, and what we're doing here in this dialogue is part of the California-China Climate Institute, China, California, US. We are working together, lots of obstacles. I don't want anybody to feel overly complacent because we are facing a very perilous future, but you and I and the Institute are working to keep together China and America as we work against this overarching planetary threat. And for that, let me just thank you for your tremendous work when you were at the United Nations. And I hope that in Costa Rica, since it's so beautiful, you can give your best thinking to us in less favorable climes. Because I can tell you where I am now, it's drought, it's hot, and I feel climate change. And therefore, I want to do everything I can. And working with you, I think we can do it. So, Christiana, thank you very much for taking time.
Thank you, Jerry. Thanks very much. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. And maybe I'll see you in Costa Rica one of these days.
Okay, good.
Sounds like a good place to be.
All right. Indeed.
Thank you.